an example, you could have a bucket filled with water. And if there's a leak in that bucket, no matter how much water you put in that bucket, it's still going to be leaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, where we look to crack the code on growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Orvins. On today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of shifting your pricing models. Stay tuned. Today's podcast is sponsored by the great team at Virtual Causeway. Imagine your sales team spending less time chasing and more time closing because buyers already know your name before that first call. Well, that's exactly what Virtual Causeway does. They help B2B companies get found earlier in the buying process by the right people through the right channels that actually influence decisions today. What's the result? Well, it's fewer cold motions, better conversations, and pipeline that moves faster. You can visit them at virtualcauseway.com and make sure to mention the show for a special rate. Now, there are 3 words that every service business owner needs to hear. Stop chasing projects. Now, my guest today is Jason Kramer, the founder and CEO of Cultivize. So Jason spent 16 years building and running JLK Creative, one of the first virtual agencies in the country. He was doing project work, deliverables in, invoice out, repeat. And he was good at it. But at some point, he looked at his own revenue data and saw what he now helps other businesses see in theirs. Money sitting in the pipeline, uncollected, because the model wasn't built to hold it. So he made a decision most agency owners never make. He shut it down on purpose. And in 2018, he founded Cultivize. It's a CRM consultancy firm built entirely around retainer relationships and lead nurturing. His clients have since tracked nearly 40 million in recovered pipeline revenue, not new leads, not marketing spend, money that was already there. It was just falling through the cracks. He's one of a handful of platinum certified CRM partners in the world. He cut his teeth on brands like Virgin Atlantic and Johnny Walker. And in my view, what makes him worth listening on this topic is simple. He didn't read about this transition. He lived it. Jason, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being here.
Carl, wow, what an amazing intro. Thank you so much. It's a hard act to follow, but I'll try.
Well, it's my pleasure. And hopefully I didn't say anything that was out of truth and it was all okay.
That sounded great. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's get kicked off. And can you share with us a little bit of the context of your world? What industries or verticals do you work in? What are the selling motions? What size companies do you work with?
Yeah. So we are agnostic to many industries. The bulk of our clients are going to be B2B service providers or selling products to businesses. Another sector for us is home service-based businesses or companies that are selling services that are north of usually, $5,000 to $10,000 in terms of a sales price, where that sales cycle is a little bit longer. So the commonality across all the industries, whether it be manufacturing, education, nonprofit, even where we're helping with communication issues, right, and communication deliverables, is that there is a cycle, right, to be able to build relationships, to communicate. And a lot of companies don't have those processes really well defined. And like you and I know, Carl, a lot of it lives up here in somebody's head, right? And so what we do is we help build better processes to build and scale companies, to find the hidden data that's in your company, but also to build repeatable systems. So as you onboard and grow your team, you can do that at scale. And so our world hovers and centers around CRM platforms and either helping companies fix the CRM they already have and get it working the way it needs to, or realizing that technology that they have or don't have is missing. And then we'll find and recommend the right solution and build that out, train the team, and stay on board with them to see that success through.
Awesome. Yeah, I worked for a VP one time, and he said the longest string in the world is the one between your ears to the tip of your finger to actually write it down. And that's what brings me back to that. But the CRM world is one that I'm such a fan of, and have done a little bit with it in my time at Salesforce and implementing it and et cetera, doing it with some others. So it's exciting. All right. How the heck did we get to this topic is probably the question that we're starting to think of. So how we got to it is I asked Jason, like everybody, what's a successful revenue initiative you've led or an existing challenge that you have solved or one that you have been trying to solve? And with a great conversation became clear, it was how to grow your business by shifting your pricing models and your structures. And so maybe if we start here, how come so many service businesses hold on to that project model even when it's, well, clearly not working for them?
Well, I think it's a few things. I think it's one, the being scared of the unknown, right, and being nervous that if you switch, you might lose customers. And it's so fortuitous that we're talking today, Carl, about this. Just yesterday, I had his name's Steve. He's a local plumber and heating guy. I've known Steve forever. We own boats and we have things in common. And anyway, so he's like, "Hey, I'm setting up this, you know, annual plan, this service contract, which I've never done before." He's like, "It'll be the exact same price you're paying now, but instead of paying like 300 a year, you're going to break out onto 12 monthly payments, and I'll give you 10% off any work I do. And if there's an emergency, I'll come out for free instead of charging you up to 3 times a year, no extra fee." I was like, "Well, that's a no-brainer. Like, how are you making any money on that?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, it's not about making more money. It's about building consistent cash flow so that I have, hundreds of customers paying me each month that smaller fee, but also when they have a problem, they're not going to go hire another plumber or heating company. They're going to hire me because I have a service contract with them." And he's like, "What happens often is that I'll come in and do a job, but then when I come back, I see another plumber sticker like on the equipment, you know?" And so it's smart, right? It's because he sees the long-term value in that, right? He's not looking for the quick gain. And so I think to answer your question, and that's hopefully a good story for the audience, that you have to have a plan and understand why you're doing it. You can't just say, "Okay, we're going to start doing retainers tomorrow." When I made the pivot, and I'll talk about it a little later, it took me several months to put together a plan of how am I going to pivot from doing project-based work to retainer work. So I think that's why is they don't understand how to make that transition, and they're scared or they're frustrated or they just think it's simpler to keep things the way it is.
It takes me what's interesting, I think, from what you just said is in the SaaS world, we change pricing models regularly. And the whole thing of SaaS is having that repeatable pricing model. But what it also sounds like is that pricing model theory of SaaS pricing of that monthly retainer is now starting to showcase into those other industries that are, I don't want to say behind, but they're more of a legacy industry where I'm calling because I have an issue, I want it done. Even with your friend, when you were talking to them about that service side of things and connecting it, how did that connect with some of the things that you did previously? Or did you give him any tips or words of advice when he went to make the change?
I did. So the funny thing is, so talk about old school. He shows me remember Trifold brochures? Like who uses those anymore, right? He whips out a Trifold brochure that's printed in a dark brown color, and it's on there is the information about the service contract, but there's also places for me to fill it out and to sign up basically. But like he's giving me a black pen to write on a dark brown background. And I'm like, "Steve, this is like, you need to have like a Sharpie with you. Like you can't even read anything." And then I said to him, "Well, I said, why are you doing this? Why not just have digital contracts? Just say, give somebody a flyer with a QR code and say, if you're interested, scan the code and then they'll get a Panda Doc or what a DocuSign, whatever they get." And he's like, "Oh," he's like, "I didn't know you can do that. Like, is that difficult?" I'm like, "No, it's really easy actually." And so, so he's trying to make the change, but he's making it in a very 1985 way, So, but that's good, right? Because he sees the potential of it, and now he just needs to take it to the next level. And that's what I find, especially in service-based businesses, but not even there, even like a lot of manufacturers we work with, believe it or not, Carl, who have been around for, 40, 60 years doing business. They're just used to doing something a certain way.
Yeah.
And their mentality is like, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But it could be, I always use an example. You could have a bucket filled with water. And if there's a leak in that bucket, no matter how much water you put in that bucket, it's still going to be leaking and it's still going to keep going down. And so if you don't see those leaks and spot them, then you're just really creating a whole lot of more energy and effort to fix something that is almost never going to get fixed.
Yeah, I agree with you. The revenue leakage is one thing, but it's also the shifting of models and the way that you're doing business. It's funny you said the Trifold. My oldest son, he's in HVAC actually, and so he was doing something for his company. And what did he build? He built a Trifold portfolio, and I was like, okay. And I said, well, why don't you use exactly what you just said? Why don't you just use a QR code and have people scan it? He's like, well, how would I do that? And so we talked through it in anyways,
Yeah.
because it is a similar thing of I want to be able to have that peace of mind. So in case something happens, right, it's kind of
Hmm.
like the insurance and carry on. But those other industries that you're right is, how many times do you see somebody in the trades? If I just sort of generalize in the trades, they come to your house and they have either a metal portfolio that opens and
Yeah.
they take a bunch of notes and then they hand it to you. It's not as digitized as we might see. So even there, shifting into the way you're you're carrying on the relationship is different. It's no longer a handshake, it's no longer cash, it's no longer pen and paper. You're now shifting to this digital world, so you have that the repeatability and that consistency like most of the SaaS companies are looking for.
So for me, when I went through looking at all the work I was doing at the agency that was on the project model, really the challenge for me is the constant hustle. Now, I don't say that I don't hustle with my business today, but it's not knowing what 3 months from now the revenue is going to be, or 6 months or 9 months from now. And so you're always constantly trying to fill the pipeline with those projects.
Hmm.
And then a lot of times, to me, the real core, I think, of why, going back to your original question, why people don't make the switch, it's about building value, right? So if someone's hiring you to do a project, they see the value you bring for that project. But what you're probably failing to do is showing the value you can provide to them throughout the year. And so if you focus on, okay, well, how can I find other things this company or person would need from me throughout the year and show them that I'm a good, valuable asset to help them solve those problems or handle that work. Once they see that, if they already like you and work with you, it's much easier to say, well, okay, well, why don't we just continue to work every month together? Um, and I'll get into more detail of kind of how I wound up deciding to make that transition and present it to the existing clients we had. But I think that's the key fundamental is you have to show that there's value. And like even Steve, the plumber, like his value was, I'm going to give you 10% off everything and I'm not going to charge you for emergency visits, you know? And I'm like, well, that's a no brainer, right? I mean, that's valuable, right? Because I'm saving money and it's just easier. So that's where I think people need to focus their time is understanding how to build more value for the existing clients they have.
Yeah. Jay Bear, who actually has been on the podcast, he wrote a book called Utility. And if you've ever read it, and he talks about using examples of helping people, right? The difference between selling and helping is two letters. And so
Mhm.
if you're selling something that you're genuinely helping somebody, because we've all had, I don't know, I've had the situation where uh, furnace doesn't come on. It's cold. What do we do now? And you right away. You're on the phone. You're trying to find somebody, and instead of knowing that I have a resource available, so agree with you. So take us back if we can. Let's go back to the point where you were looking at it. I think there's a part of the hustle that you said when you talk about the hustle. I don't think it's like your work ethic or how hard you work. What I'm thinking is that I know that I have these number of projects, I finish them, and even though they're complete, I might not get the money for another 30, 60, 90 days. And is that where that hustle comment comes from, is because of that inconsistency in the cash flow that you were trying to solve for?
That's part of it. It's also part of it is, I used to build with the agency towards the end of that business after doing 16 years. I'd say for the last easily 10, 12 years of that business, we were doing a lot of website development work. And so, you build a website, you're like, okay, we can knock this out in 3 months or in 6 months. It's more complicated. Those projects, especially the easy ones that you think you could knock out in 3 months, took like 12 months sometimes to get
Mm.
done. And so now you can't charge anymore, right? Because it's delays from the client. I mean, sometimes you can. So it's not only about delays on payment. The way that I used to get around that though is I would have installments, I'd have milestones. So like, for example, like once the wireframe is approved, you pay this. Once we get to this milestone, you pay this. So it was never a 50%. It was always like, a 20, then another 30. And by the end, we were almost done with the whole project. All they owed me was like 10% left of what the project cost was.
Mhm.
So like that wasn't really an issue because that would prevent them from stalling because they knew that, we would have to hit those milestones to kind of keep moving through and get payment before we moved on to the next milestone. Um, so that kind of handled that piece of it, which was a learning curve, right? I didn't do that in the beginning. I'm like, yeah, give me like 30%, 50%, we'll start. you know, and and then like months and months go by, and you're like, okay, well, this should have been done already, right? So that's definitely, I think, a lot of businesses kind of realize, the hard way, and the only way to really kind of learn from. So that's, I think, an important part of that is having those expectations and being transparent, with your clients.
And that also falls in play with some of the other, like in manufacturing we were talking about. Manufacturing has milestones as well. You have a certain amount due upon receipt, right? So hey,
Hmm.
I got to go and buy some stuff, or I got to be able to invest in doing the work. And then you have the milestones of like factory acceptance test and site acceptance test and blah blah blah. But you have those milestones along the way so that you can say, hey, by the way, pay me for the thing that I'm doing. But it does bring up an interesting question of the question that I think I should ask you is, when you went through this whole thing of the realization that you needed to shift into a different model, did you look at it from a value to time aspect? So the value that somebody's getting is equivalent to the time. So I'll give an example. You build a web, you say, hey, it's going to take me 6 months to create a website for you. Great. And you do it in actually 2 months. Did, like, as a customer, do I go back and, well, Jason, you told me it was going to take actually longer, so I don't want to pay you all of this money because you did it faster than I anticipated.
Hmm.
Was there any sort of pushback on value to time when you made this transition?
No, that never came up at all.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, it was always kind of like the opposite, where they're like, "Well, why does it take so long? It's just a website." you know.
Right.
I'm like, well, let me. That's a whole other conversation. Let me explain to you the technical aspects, and I started building websites before you even could see a website on a phone. So I mean, I'm going way back where we were just. I mean, I was building websites in Flash and using all sorts of technology that don't even exist anymore today. So um, so it was a whole other thing once we got into the world of like, okay, now the website's got to be compatible on all these different monitors and devices and tablets, and you know, people don't realize the complexity of making sure that that actually functions correctly.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
agree.
yeah.
So what was the launch point, or the moment when you, and not to go into the very specifics of the details and cash flow,
Hmm.
etc., but when you looked at this and you said, all right, I have to make a change away from these project based to retainer based. What was the challenge that you experienced, and for you, like, I gotta solve this.
Well, the challenge was of simply like, how do I communicate this right to the customers? That was the challenge, and how do I, to your point, show that I'm a problem solver to be adding value throughout a longer period of time than just for the projects they were doing. That was the biggest part of it. And because I'm a data guy, kind of, and that's, I mean, I have to be, I guess, if I got into the CRM world. So like, I was always intrigued, even when I was, a graphic designer just out of college, like kind of that part of the things my brain always was interested in. So I started looking at the numbers of things, and that's how I was able to put the plan together to present it to the clients.
Hmm. Okay, and did you have any sort of issues, or did you look at it and go, it's taking me more time for accounts receivable, or I'm looking at our bank account and it's, like, I'll say chunky because we get chunks at a time and I
Yeah.
need to smooth it out. Like, was there anything else that went into that discussion other than the communication?
Well, it was also about what I wanted to have, like, in terms of goals, right? So like, there was always, every business has a revenue goal, right? Quarterly and whatever often you have it, monthly goals, and so it was looking at prior years of revenue, seeing where the growth was, and saying, okay, well, here's the number I want to hit for like my first year doing like this on, and it wasn't full on retainer. I want people to understand. It's not like I told people we're not doing project work anymore. It was really going to the existing, at that time, I don't remember the number, maybe it was like 60 or so clients, and presenting to them, hey, let me try to get you onto this retainer model, and here's why it'd be beneficial. But for newer stuff, it was pitching the retainer, right, to new businesses. Yeah, we'll build you the website, which is a project, but here's all the other things we'll help you with after the website's done. You
Mm.
know, and it didn't always work, right? I mean, some people just want the project, but and I got to the point, fortunately enough, where I was able to turn work away, which is always, I think every business wants to get to that point where you could be like, you know what, I don't need, the money would be nice, but like, this isn't a fit for whatever number of reasons. And so that was also a great feeling, as a business owner, getting to that point where we could start turning away work that we just felt wasn't a good fit for, a number of reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were the insights, or what are the things that went into you to actually decide on what that new pricing model looked like? Did you
Yeah.
just do it yourself? Did you hire somebody? Because
Nope.
I think pricing models is one of the most challenging things to solve.
Of course. So this is what I did, and this is my this is going to sound absolutely insane. Um, so even today, we're a team of 5 people. All right, Carl. Back then, our team was about the same size. We weren't never like a huge. That's why you brought up in a good point. I built a virtual agency before there were even virtual agencies. Like when I started my business in 2001, there was no Upwork, there was no Fiverr, there was no like so I built my freelancers based on people I knew in the industry. And so I grew the agency, which is hiring people to work on a project basis to keep my costs low, because the angle I had was, agencies are known, especially like in Manhattan, where I used to work with the agency I worked for. I've worked for a few, but you're paying for like the name, you're paying for like 30 people sitting at a conference room table and only 2 people do the work. And I was like, okay, well, if I need to get rid of all those expenses, like how can I operate more effectively, and efficiently to bring more value? So anyway, I was running. My point is, I was using a project management software. I think I might even been using like Highrise or Basecamp or something at the time, maybe. But I had everybody taking diligent notes of how much time it took to do things, right? And so I had a lot of data. And so what I did is I went and I built spreadsheets to analyze. Okay, for example, this company I had was a big HVAC distributor and manufacturer. I did all sorts of work for them. And I said, okay, let me list out in the spreadsheet all the projects I did, how long it took me to do them, how many hours, and then let me look at that amortized over a year. And it wound up being, let's say it was like, I don't know, I'm just making a number, 250 hours a year. I said, okay, 250 hours a year at, let's just say $100 for an easy number. I said, if you were to continue the project work, right, this is what you'd be paying me at the $100 an hour. I said, but if we did a retainer, we would divide those hours so they're usable throughout the year, and I'll give you a 10% discount on the hourly rate. And so, and then what it did was I said, well, but there's other things we don't know about that you'll probably need from me. So while last year we only did, let's say, 200 hours worth of work, I said it probably makes sense to add another, 5 or 10 hours a month on top of that to cover the unknowns, right? Because a lot of clients had unknown requests that came up. And so what it did is, even though I gave them a slightly discounted rate, I was selling them more hours, but I was able to then show to them they were getting us basically, at their call. It was like the bat phone, right?
Right.
Because a lot of the companies I work with, Carl, and this is the other big piece of it, which we didn't talk about, which is important. When you do project work, especially if you're a company of like, maybe let's say north of 5 million, 10 million in revenue, you have to have purchase orders. You got to get approvals for things. And all those things take time and slow things down. But when you have an existing relationship and they're paying you a monthly fee, all that accounting stuff goes out the window. You don't have to worry about that. So now you're working with the CMO or somebody in marketing or someone in sales, and they're like, hey, I need this project. And it's like, okay, we'll get started, right? Because you don't need all those other approval processes anymore. So that's a huge piece of it too, is just we really get momentum and moving things a lot quicker.
There were times in my experience where it cost more to cut the purchase order than the purchase order was worth, because all the steps you had to go through. So I certainly remember that. Then there's another question that I'd like to ask you about, and because when you shifted from project to retainer, it sounds like, this is how I'm hearing it, so tell me if I'm way off.
Sure.
It sounds like each of your customers, you brought them a situation, said, here's what the retainer would look like on what it is for the year. And that was more specific to work you've done with customers looking back.
Right.
Did you have different retainers and different models for them, because each of them was different? And then anybody new coming in, how did you handle them?
I love that question. So yes, so every existing customer, I put together like a PowerPoint presentation, giving them a history of what and a lot of these customers, mind you, we've been working with for a couple of years. So it wasn't just like brand new clients. So I had like a lot of good data, luckily, that I just was able to pull out. But I created, nothing crazy. Maybe it was a 10 or 15 page, presentation. And I just, like, documenting like kind of what we did, the transition, where we were able to get them, what the things look like before they work with us, what things look like now, what things could look like in the future. And then towards the end of that, I basically had like a comparison, like the good, better, best, and it was, here's what you've been doing with us for the last couple of years. This is what your average monthly costs have been, your average annual costs, what the deliverables have been. And then I basically just did a comparison and said, well, we can do all that other work, but here's where you would actually save. Because a lot of those other bigger companies, right, as much as they value me, they have budgets. So if I can save some money for them and deliver the same amount of work, and maybe even a little bit more, to them, like they were the hero, because now they're coming in under budget, and saving a little bit of money. So that worked for the existing customers, and I'd say, we signed up. I don't remember what the number was. It's so many years ago, but I would say probably at least like 70%, if not more, signed up for the retainer model. So it's a pretty high conversion to get people to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the new customers, talk about. All right, so if we go back, right, this is before AI. This is before all the tools we have. This is like you have your calculator, right? Like a spreadsheet to figure things out. And so one of the challenges I had when I did project work was, how do I quote things accurately? Somebody's asking me for this website, and they have this functionality they need, this number of pages, they need copywriting, they don't need copywriting, whatever it might be. And what I found was, after doing it for a number of years and looking back, some jobs we were highly profitable on, some we lost a lot of money on, right? And so I said, well, how can I be more consistent in my pricing? And so what I did is I analyzed hundreds of website projects we built and how much time was spent doing that project. And not just the project as a whole, but like programming, design, wireframing, like all the different elements. And then I built a pricing model in Excel. And so then when I got a new, RFP coming through, I just had to go into Excel and say, this is how many pages the website's going to be. This is this, this is that. And I just filled in all the variables and it spit out a price for me. Yep. And then when I realized, to cover my basis, for us, about 20 to 25% of the total fee usually covered project management. So now I no longer had to guess at project management costs, because the formula that I built would automatically calculate what the project management would be and how many hours were expected to be needed to manage that project. And I will tell you, that was huge, because not only did it create more profitability, but it allowed me to quote things so much quicker. Like if you asked me today for a quote, I could get a quote for you tomorrow. Before that, I would spend weeks probably, trying to figure it out to make sure I was going to be profitable.
I've actually had two people that on the podcast. One was Doug Landis, and one of the things that he said to me, because we were talking about pricing models and how challenging it is of like, and he talked about the willingness to pay. He said that was one of the things he said, the willingness to pay. What are the customers' willingness to pay for us to build our models? And then I had Roey Hartuv, who actually is from Willingness to Pay. He works with them. And we talked about pricing models and how hard it is to find it. And the fact that you came to good, better, best is great. And then you had all this data to go into it, because what you're trying to do is be able to pitch somebody pretty quickly to say, oh, you know what, based on what you heard, based on what I'm hearing, you're going to be in the better category for these reasons. And it's going to be somewhere around $25,000. I'm just making stuff up. It's going to be around $25,000 for it. Oh, actually what you're going to need, it's much more complex. And we've done 300 of this and our pricing insights go into it. Did that shift the conversations? Like, were you having that type of conversation with new customers being like, okay, you know what, you're in better or you're in best for these reasons. And then you give them the ability to go, oh, you know what, Jason, I don't want that. I actually want to be in good.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it happens, right? You come in with the recommendation. I mean, even today, so I'll give you another scenario, even with Cultivize, a lot of our work role is consulting for people that already have a CRM. Right. So they have something, they have a HubSpot, whatever they have something and they need help. And so the way that we do it is we do block timing, right? So we say, okay, we think it's going to be this number of hours. And usually for the most part, when we're coming in and fixing things they already have, it's usually a phased type approach. We're like, okay, let's say phase 1 is, 15 hours. Phase 2 might be 20. Phase 3 might be, 15, whatever it might be. I said, you can pay each phase, and this is our rate, or you could buy a block of time that would cover phase 1 and 2 or all three phases, and we'll lower our hourly rate.
Yeah.
And so that's always people are like, well, yeah, sure, we'll do that. I even have, which to my surprise, not to my surprise, I should say, but a little bit, when I started Cultivize and we started selling CRM software to new businesses, just like the SaaS model, right? They do it, almost every SaaS model does what I'm about to say, but is pay up front for the year and you get the best savings.
Right.
And, it's easy to pay up front when it's a few $1,000s. So we had clients paying us, 50, 60 grand up front, and I wasn't sure how it was honestly going to take, given like the current economic situation at the time, like the political, environment and everything else that comes into it. And so I was kind of starting to be surprised in how many people were like, yeah, like that's cool. We'll do that. No problem. We'll pay up front. Now, again, one of the things we talked about offline about that model is keeping the cash flow, right? Because it's great to get those big chunks of cash, but if you're not carefully, watching that, then you could quickly spend that. And then, if that's supposed to pay your expenses for the next 11 months, and now that money's gone, that could actually be a detriment. So what we do is we actually have a separate business checking account. So we get money from a client paid up front for the year. We figure out how much money that divides into each month that needs to cover our expenses for what they're hiring us for. And then we just put it in there. And then every month through the bank account, I have an automatic withdrawal. So it automatically every month transfers money from one account to another just to cover costs, for all those types of projects every month, which has been phenomenal, because it keeps cash flow at a nice steady line. And to make sure that all those, future expenses are covered for.
Right. Yeah. And all of the things that you have to go through as you go through the challenge of either one lump sum, it's going to be monthly, it's going to be quarterly, what are the paying terms and what are the billing terms, and how do you make sure that you don't do it and don't spend it all, and some of the complexities there. So yeah. What we've kind of talked through is you recognize the problem statement. It seemed like, right? You had the problem statement was you're constantly trying to follow the bouncing ball, or trying to follow the dollar, if we say it that way, to try to get it. And you recognize it was not a good way. So you brought in a new way of thinking, which is this moving to retainer model. You rooted it into a new pricing model with data and insights. You create this presentation, you go to talk to the customer, and you say, all right, Carl, I know we've been doing work for a long time. Here it is. How did that conversation go? What did it sound like?
Well, so I didn't just kind of go into the presentation, right? So once we were ready and I had everything, all the ducks in the row, as they say, I would reach out to every customer and say, hey, this is what we're working on. And I'd love to just have some time, and at that point, there weren't very many Zoom meetings back in when I was doing this. So I'd go in person, and meet with them and say, this is why I want to meet. This is what I'd like to talk about. And I just want to get your feel for it, right? So I wasn't forcing it on them, say, hey, we're moving to this model, either take it or leave it. And, if you don't take it, we're walking away. It was like, just want to get your thoughts, right? Because I wanted it to be their idea to make the switch versus my idea telling them. And right. So the way I presented it was, I found some ways where I think we could, do some more things together, help you out more, bring some more value, and at the same time, save you some money. Who would say no to that, right? I mean, so that's the way I framed it. And then in person, presenting it, I think worked a lot better in my favor because I had those personal relationships and I wasn't just sending them like a proposal or a document to review. It was more focused around a conversation and just using my presentation as data points that I could reference during that discussion.
Yeah, it's a great way. It's a great way to do it because you're in person. You can read everything. You can ask them questions. Hey, what if we did this? I remember doing this way back with actually, I don't know, I'll say it with Vidyard, but we went through a pricing change. And I remember having the first conversation with the customer saying, hey, you know what? We're going to go through a pricing change and it's going to sound like it's going to be more, but it's actually better for you. And I laid it out and they're like, yeah, that's way better. Let's do that. And the conversation was, I don't want to say simple, but because of how prepared I was to go in to say, here's everything you've done in the past year, and here's all the things. And then, by the way, this is the new model, and this is how it helps you. But if you give people that ability, I think is what I'm hearing, you gave the people to go, okay, he understands. Two, he quantified, and three, he translated that to me for a better path. So you went from what is to what the future is and how it connects the two dots. So it sounds like you did a really good job of explaining that with them. So they went, yeah, Jason, no brainer. Like your HVAC guy, yeah, or plumber,
Yeah.
no brainer. Sign me up.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
That's what we all want. We, it takes some effort and skillfulness, I think, to get to that point. But and
yeah,
we all try our best. But
yeah.
yeah, it's yeah, and that's like I was saying. A shotgun approach to this is never going to work because there's just so many unknowns,
Mhm.
right? So you have to come prepared with a plan, right? That is, I think, yes, you're doing it. Maybe I don't want to say for selfish reasons, but you're doing it to help your business. But you also more so you have to show, like you said, like, and I, that sounds awesome, by the way, Carl, of like what you did. So that's what you have to focus on. Like, how do I get the client excited about this, right? To see that this is actually beneficial to them.
Yeah. From your experience going back to it, what's the downside or what's the gotcha for somebody that would, if they're going through it, what's the gotcha for them to consider as they're approaching this? Like, is it, you know what, somebody's going to opt out, be like, you know what, Jason, I only want to do project based. I'm not interested in retainer, and you
Mhm.
lose business? Or do you start to see some, I don't want to say culling of your business, but what did it do, or what are the things for people to be aware of?
Well, I think you have to figure out what you're going to be offering, right? So, like most people think retainer, they think, okay, there's like ongoing deliverables, right? There's something being delivered maybe every week, every month. And so, understanding what that is. So, when I first started this, I did, the naive thing to be like, oh, and this is when like, blogs were first, not first starting out, but like, it wasn't like today. I was like, oh, well, we'll do like a blog every week and we'll do this. And I was more forcing on them deliverables that not every client really needed or had value for. And so I'm like, okay, well, this isn't going to work
Mhm.
because I can't build a package. That package isn't going to be suitable for everybody. So I had to find a way to be more flexible. And so I
Yeah.
think one of the challenges is if you're building a retainer, how is there like levers in there to make it where it's flexible, that it's not giving somebody something they don't need,
Mhm.
right? Or that they're not going to get value from. And so that's one of it. The other part of it is just the logistics of that, right? Making sure you have like good project management tools, good billing tools to track hours, right? Because now if you're going to be doing something that is over the course of 12 months versus maybe 1 month or 3 months, you need to be able to roll all that up and see where you're at and engage it. Like, are we spending more time, especially in the agency world? It's notorious where you're spending way more time than you ever thought you would spend, working on a project or talking to a client. So managing all that is extremely important
Mhm.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's an operational piece as well as making sure you're not just selling something to sell something that doesn't ultimately bring value.
Yeah, people buy people buy things for a few different reasons, right? And if it's making them better, or they're able to save money or make more money, then it makes it a lot easier. So um I told you I would get you out of here within an hour, and I'm looking at the time going, okay, I don't want to break my promise. So when I like to move in, so if we move in towards sort of the wrap up, and I ask everybody, I say everybody likes new and nobody likes different, and when you do both at the same time, it can cause friction or uncertainty, and I don't know that there's a better example than this one exactly. So for somebody thinking about how they can improve their billing models or their pricing models, and shifting away from that project based model, what are two or three actionable things that you would say, hey, by the way, go do these two or three things on Monday morning, and that'll help put you on the path for success?
So the first thing to do is anybody listening hopefully has some type of data that they could go in and look at. So I would say, look at data for the last 2 to 3 years. Look at not maybe every customer, maybe you pick out your top, depending on what you have, top 50, top 100, top 200, and just looking to see what those customers were spending and to see over what period of time are they, were they getting invoiced, doing a project once a month, once a quarter, once a year. I think that high level data just to see how much you were actually doing for those customers and how often they needed you, I think it definitely for sure is the first step. The second step is seeing where there's commonalities. A lot of times, sometimes, depending on the business, you might offer, especially like manufacturers, you might sell a lot of different things. And so I've walked into situations where they don't even realize what the sort of top product, top services that they sell. And you say you have 100 SKUs. Which are your top five? Well, I don't know. How do you not know that question, right? And so that's something you could look at too. Is so if you're, let's say, an agency or somebody, you in whatever industry, and you offer 10, 20, 30 different services, whatever the number is, look at your data to see what are the services that are most popular in terms of what people are buying from you, because you may also be putting a lot of your effort into trying to sell stuff that nobody even wants. And so that can help with understanding how to position the retainer model, or just how to sell the core things that you guys are really good at. And then the third piece is, I would say, systems. It's a good idea, like if you're the owner of the business, talking to the head of operations or head of different departments. What tools are you, like, if you don't know the answer yourself, of course, like what tools are you using for project management? What tools are we using for time tracking, if you track time? What tools are we using for invoicing, for our CRM? This is a good time to understand what technology you have in place and what the functions of those are. And the other part of that is, just don't take somebody's word for it and be like, oh yeah, we have this tool, it's our CRM and it's great. Well, have them show you, right? Say, sit with them for a half hour and say, can you log into the CRM and show me how you use this every day? Where do you click? What do you look at? What reports are you looking at? Because that's where you start recognizing, oh, wow, yeah, we're paying all this money for software and no one's even using it. Yeah. And so those are the few things that are very relatively easy to do without any investment of cost. It's just a little bit of investment of time.
There's two things you said there that there's two things that come to mind from everything you just said there. One is, again, I can't remember who said it, but they said they attach themselves to an invoice, and a CEO sat and watched one of his team members review it. And I said, I could already anticipate a CEO being very frustrated for the amount of steps and clicks and everything. It was like, okay, got to fix that. Because sometimes the systems do get in your way of solving it. So I really like the call out. Jason, this has been so much fun, and I know we could talk for probably a couple of hours, and I keep asking you questions, but if somebody wants to learn a little bit more about you, where would you suggest that they kind of look into and connect with you?
Sure, Carl. The best place is going to afterthelead.com. And so there you can connect with me on social. So all my socials there. There's also a link to book a call with me. Love having these types of conversations. No pressure, no obligation. Schedule a call. Happy to talk to anybody that's listening today, answer any specific questions. And then we didn't really get into too much of the other things, but there's some really great free downloads and ebooks and guides there that I think could be really helpful for people that are listening today, with other aspects of the business that we talked about, more with process-driven things they need to bring the leads in and nurture them and get them through the sales process.
Yeah. There is a lot to do from all the process side. So having guides and resources is super
helpful. Lots of guides there. Yes.
Yeah. So Jason, I appreciate you doing this. We don't have a relationship before this, so it's a new one for me. But I've definitely enjoyed your energy, the way you think about it, the data side of things, and bringing everything together to find a better way. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope that I get the chance to meet you. And by the way, I have to throw it in here because Jason already talked about it. If you do listen and you do connect with him, he's got a couple Easter eggs inside of his picture there. So just in case you want to take a look, there are some that is a lot of fun to go with. So, but yeah, thanks so much for doing this today, Jason.
My pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun. That's going to wrap up another episode of the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast. Obviously, want to thank Jason for sharing these incredibly invaluable insights. And as you heard, there's some strategy you can put into action. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl with the Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn your obstacles into your opportunities. Thank you for investing your time with us today. We'll see you on the next episode.